You wake up to the suffocating smell of smoke in the middle of the night. Your eyes instantly start to water from the thick black smoke. Through the thin wooden wall, you can hear a growing rumble and the screams of frightened people. The air in the small room becomes unbearably hot and dry. Thus begins your last day in old London in the year 1666. This once great city will soon turn into a giant blazing bonfire. Our channel explores history through the lens of the human senses. We want to show you the past as it really was. The Great Fire of London is often described simply as a dry historical fact from an old textbook. But for the average resident, it was a real portal into a blazing, pitch-black hell. You will taste the ash, feel the heat of the flames, and experience the terror of a deadly stampede. Surviving in such unbearable conditions required incredible luck and tremendous physical endurance. The capital's narrow wooden streets instantly turned into death traps for those fleeing. People tried to save their belongings, but in the end, they lost what mattered most: their own lives. The fire methodically devoured block after block, leaving no chance of an easy escape. Today we'll take a detailed look at why you had almost no chance of surviving this catastrophe. History has no patience for weakness, and the flames will prove it to you very quickly. '17th century London was built almost entirely of very dry wood. The houses stood so close together that neighbours could easily shake hands through the window. The upper floors of the buildings overhung the narrow alleys, blocking out the sunlight. The wood was generously coated with pitch to protect it from the constant English damp. This black pitch made the walls of the houses ideal fuel for any accidental fire. The summer of 1666 was incredibly hot and dry. There had been no rain in the capital for several long, sweltering months. The wooden planks had dried out so much that they resembled high-quality gunpowder in a sealed barrel. The River Thames had receded significantly, depriving the city of its main source of life-saving moisture. The city's water supply system was in a deplorable state and barely functioning. The whole of vast London had turned into a giant time bomb, waiting for its fateful spark. The streets were always littered with mountains of dry hay and rotting straw. Horses left behind tons of garbage and dried manure every day. In deep cellars, merchants stored vast reserves of oil, strong alcohol, and coal. Old warehouses containing real gunpowder stood right next to residential buildings. Any stray spark could instantly ignite these dangerous chemical stockpiles. A strong east wind blew constantly over the city during those fateful autumn days. It carried the stench of rotting waste and acrid smoke from chimneys. This dry wind became the fire's chief ally in the impending large-scale tragedy. The air currents acted like giant bellows in a forge, fanning the deadly flames. Natural conditions had conspired in the worst possible way for the residents of the unsuspecting capital. An ordinary London evening gave no hint whatsoever of the impending global catastrophe. There was simply no centralized fire alarm system in those days. People learned of the disaster only from the screams of neighbors or the strong smell of smoke. Night watchmen rarely patrolled the streets and often slept on the job. The city guard had no clear plan of action in case of a major disaster. Saving those in distress was entirely up to the victims themselves. Your house was most likely located in the very center of an incredibly dense neighborhood. A narrow wooden staircase inside the building was the only way out to the street. Windows were often covered with heavy shutters that were very difficult to open in a hurry. Roofs were covered with straw or wooden shingles that would burst into flames at the slightest spark. Getting out of such a dwelling at night was an incredibly difficult and dangerous task. Inside London homes, wax candles and oil lamps burned constantly. People cooked hot meals over open fires in primitive stoves and fireplaces. Sparks from crooked chimneys regularly fell onto neighboring dry wooden roofs. Small fires broke out in the big city practically every single day. Londoners had grown so accustomed to the smell of smoke that they simply stopped paying it the attention it deserved. This fatal habit played a very cruel and bloody trick on them. The streets were paved with rough cobblestones that were very slippery under leather soles. Running over such uneven stones in the dark was extremely dangerous. If someone stumbled, They could easily break a leg and be left lying on the ground forever. There was almost no street lighting, except for the dim lanterns at some of the wealthy houses' doors. The city at night was plunged into pitch darkness, concealing deadly hidden dangers. High city walls surrounded central London with a solid stone ring. The only way out of the city was through a few narrow, guarded gates. These gates were always locked tight at night, with heavy iron bolts. People inside the walls found themselves locked in a huge wooden cage with no escape route. When the Great Fire broke out, these gates became the sites of the most terrifying stampedes. You lie down to sleep on a hard bed in your small, dark room. The air feels stifling, but you chalk it up to the summer heat. Behind the thin wall, rats scurry about, the usual inhabitants of any old London house. Your breathing is steady, and your dreams hold no hint of anything bad. At this very moment, a deadly, ravenous flame is already taking shape on the neighbouring street. The clock is relentlessly counting down the final minutes of normal life in the old capital. It all began in Thomas Farriner's small bakery late on a Sunday night. The baker had finished his grueling shift and gone upstairs to bed. He was absolutely certain he had completely extinguished the fire in his large oven. However, small smouldering embers remained completely unnoticed in the darkness of the night. The heat from them gradually spread to the dry kindling scattered nearby. A light draft quickly fanned these small embers into open flames. The fire began to slowly creep across the wooden floor toward the load-bearing walls. Soon, the baskets of kindling prepared for the morning's fresh-baked goods caught fire. The room filled with acrid smoke, which began to rise thickly up the stairs. The sleeping people on the second floor were still unaware of the terrible death approaching. The stagnant air suddenly reeked of burning wood and smouldering old fabric. Thomas Farriner woke up coughing violently from the thick, suffocating smoke. He opened his eyes and saw with horror that the entire first floor was engulfed in bright flames. The staircase was already burning so fiercely that it was absolutely impossible to go down. The baker's family rushed in panic to a small, narrow window on the top floor. Miraculously, they managed to cross the roof to the neighbouring house and save their lives. To their great sorrow, the baker's young maid could not overcome her intense fear. She flatly refused to climb across the slippery roof at such a terrifying height. The girl remained in the burning house and became the first official victim of the Great Fire. Her desperate screams were quickly drowned out by the terrifying roar of the raging, insatiable flames. Meanwhile, the fire began to burst rapidly out of the broken windows. Red-hot sparks flew onto the neighbouring thatched roofs due to the strong, gusty wind. Burning pieces of wood fell onto the narrow street of Pudding Lane like a fiery meteor shower. The neighbouring wooden houses burst into flames one after another within a few short minutes. People were awakened by a strange, loud crackling and aggressive pounding on their doors. The first powerful wave of local panic began in one small city block. The local night watchman finally noticed a strange, ominous glow on the empty street. He began shouting loudly and desperately pounding on strangers' wooden doors with his club. Frightened neighbours began rushing out into the street en masse, clad only in thin nightgowns. Many brought buckets of water with them, trying to douse the first local hotspots. There was a catastrophic shortage of water, and the flames were only gaining destructive strength. The heat became so unbearably intense that standing near the burning houses was physically painful. Soon, the Lord Mayor of London, a man named Bloodworth, reluctantly arrived at the scene. His reaction to the events went down in history as a prime example of fatal stupidity. The mayor looked at the burning houses and merely waved his hand dismissively. He loudly declared that even a woman in a pinch could put out this pathetic fire. After these arrogant words, he calmly went home to tend to his dreams. This arrogant decision cost the lives of hundreds of people and completely destroyed the entire city. While the lazy officials slept, the swift fire reached the warehouses near the River Thames. Huge commercial stocks of pitch, tar, hemp, and strong alcohol were stored there. The explosions of these overflowing warehouses shook the ground and sent pillars of bright flame into the sky. Now it was absolutely impossible to stop the raging fire with ordinary buckets of water. The fiery monster had broken loose and began to mercilessly devour the sleeping capital. You hear the distant, muffled roar of explosions through your deep sleep. The ground beneath your bed begins to vibrate slightly and very unpleasantly. The acrid smell of burning seeps through the cracks in the windows and fills your lungs. Your body instinctively reacts to the danger with a strong, painful coughing fit. Your brain desperately tries to make sense of what is happening in the complete darkness of your stuffy room. Finally, loud, panicked screams from the street make you jump to your feet. You rush to the window and see a terrifying orange, pulsating glow above the rooftops. The sky glows with an ominous artificial light, even though dawn is still a long way off. Shadows from neighboring houses dance grotesquely on the walls like terrifying ghosts. Your heart begins to pound wildly from the mounting primal human terror. The air outside quickly turns into a toxic grey mixture of ash and hot smoke. You take your first deep breath and immediately break into a long, agonizing cough. Your eyes start to sting unbearably, as if someone had sprinkled fine broken glass into them. The smoke is so thick that it's absolutely impossible to see the end of your own street. Breathing becomes harder and more painful with every passing minute. People around you are running around in a complete frenzy, screaming loudly in genuine terror. Neighbors are desperately hauling heavy wooden chests and bulky furniture out of their homes. They are trying to save their belongings, wasting precious time that could be used to flee quickly. Children cry loudly, having lost their parents in this terrifying and unpredictable nighttime chaos. Dogs howl pitifully in fear, instinctively sensing the rapid approach of a deadly threat. This cacophony is deafening and makes it impossible to think clearly and logically. The heat from the rapidly approaching flames begins to be physically felt on bare skin. The air temperature rises rapidly, causing the fleeing people to sweat profusely. Leather boots heat up so much that they painfully burn the delicate soles of the feet. Clothes stick to the wet body, creating the sensation of being inside a massive furnace. People's faces quickly become covered in black, sticky soot and streams of dirty sweat. You try to find a way out of your narrow alley toward the saving river. But the wooden houses on both sides of the street are already beginning to blaze fiercely. Fiery arches form where the roofs of the houses touch each other tightly. Walking under such arches means risking a huge chunk of burning wood falling on your head. You have to constantly and deftly dodge the red-hot debris falling from above. It becomes absolutely impossible to get your bearings because of the thick black smoke. The streets familiar from early childhood change beyond recognition in a matter of minutes. The thick haze completely obscures landmarks, leaving only an ominous orange glow ahead. People rush from side to side, blindly bumping into one another in the darkness. A sense of utter hopelessness paralyzes the will of many residents of the stricken capital. Some Londoners fall into a deep stupor and refuse to leave their doomed homes. They simply sit on their doorsteps and stare blankly at the approaching roaring fire. The shock completely robs them of the ability to rationally assess the mortal danger hanging over them. Others begin to pray aloud, kneeling right in the street mud. But the flames spare neither the fear-paralyzed nor the fervently devout townspeople. They methodically devour house after house, wiping street after street off the face of the earth. You suddenly realize that you need to drop all heavy items and save only your own life. The heavy bag of coins you've grabbed pulls your arms down heavily. You unclench your fingers, and the coins scatter with a clatter across the dirty, scorching pavement. The crowd suddenly grabs you with force and carries you in a completely unknown direction. Controlling your own body in such a dense stream of people is simply impossible. You are squeezed from all sides so hard that your ribs begin to creak pitifully and loudly. Someone's sharp elbow strikes you painfully right in your defenseless solar plexus. You struggle to stay on your feet, realizing that falling now means certain death. The crowd will mercilessly trample anyone who ends up on the slippery stones of the nighttime pavement. The sound of the raging fire resembles the roar of thousands of enraged, starving wild beasts. Huge wooden beams burst with a deafening crack, very similar to cannon fire. This terrifying noise drowns out even the loudest cries for help from neighboring houses. You feel your eardrums throbbing painfully from this incessant roar. The fire is now everywhere, in front, behind, on the sides, and even high above your head. London's narrow, winding streets were not designed to handle the simultaneous evacuation of the entire population. Some alleys were barely wide enough for two adult men to pass each other comfortably. Now, however, thousands of people driven mad by fear poured into these cramped stone corridors. The crush became so dense that one could breathe only by tilting one's head far back. The smell of unwashed, sweaty bodies in the crowd mingled with the suffocating stench of burnt human flesh. The situation was critically exacerbated by heavy wooden carts loaded with household goods. Wealthy townspeople were hiring carts en masse to transport their valuables out of the disaster zone. These incredibly cumbersome carts got hopelessly stuck in the narrow turns of the old streets. They created insurmountable wooden barricades in the path of the rushing streams of people. Horses neighed wildly, thrashed at their harnesses, and mauled the Londoners standing nearby with their powerful hooves. People desperately tried to climb over the stuck carts, stepping right on other people's belongings. Antique trunks broke under the weight of dozens of feet, scattering jewels and fine clothing. The crowd mercilessly trampled expensive silks and family heirlooms, sinking into the street mud. If anyone fell in this mass of people, they had no chance of getting back up. The screams of people being trampled alive merged into a single, drawn-out moan of human despair. It was a purely animalistic struggle for the right to take the next life-saving step forward. The heat from the burning buildings forced the crowd to instinctively squeeze toward the very center of the street. But the center was already packed with carts, panicking livestock, and fallen people. Those who found themselves right up against the walls suffered terrible burns from the blazing wood. Clothes burst into flames on the townspeople's backs, simply from the incredibly high temperature of the surrounding air. People ran like living torches until they fell dead onto the scorching stone pavement. You feel someone's unfamiliar hands desperately clutching your sweat-soaked doublet. A falling man struggles with all his might to stay on his feet, using you as a support. You strike his hands harshly to keep from collapsing with him onto the slippery stones. At this moment, morality and compassion give way entirely to the instinct for self-preservation. Your heart aches with guilt, but your legs continue to move forward mechanically. The air in the alleys is so scorching that it burns your bronchial tubes with every short breath. It feels as though you're inhaling not oxygen, but boiling water straight from a boiling cauldron. The saliva in your mouth dries up completely, and your tongue becomes rough as coarse sandpaper. The thirst is so agonizing that people are ready to greedily drink water from dirty drainage ditches. However, the foul-smelling water in the ditches has long since evaporated due to the hellish heat all around. The situation in the square seems slightly better, as there is a bit more open space here, but the wind constantly carries whirlwinds of burning straw from the surrounding roofs. These blazing, fiery clumps swirl through the air, scorching faces and setting women's dresses ablaze. The girls, screaming in terror, try to knock the flames off their long skirts by rolling on the ground. The chaos in this square strongly resembles the terrifying medieval paintings of the Last Judgment. You stop for a second to catch your breath and wipe the smoke from your stinging eyes. Your hands tremble so badly that you can barely lift them to your face. The sleeves of your linen shirt are covered in a thick layer of greasy black soot. Suddenly, the wind shifts and the fire front begins to rush straight toward the square. The trap snaps shut, and you must once again search for a new path to safety. The fire had reached such colossal proportions that it began to create its own deadly microclimate within the city. A massive mass of scorching air rose rapidly above the roofs of the burning houses. In its place, fresh cold air from the city outskirts was sucked in at tremendous speed. This physical phenomenon is called a firestorm, and it turns a fire into a true natural monster. The wind howled so loudly that it seemed as if a giant, mythical, enraged monster were howling. The most terrible cultural tragedy was the destruction of the majestic St. Paul's Cathedral. Frightened residents had brought their valuables there, trusting in the reliability of the cathedral's thick stone walls. The cathedral was surrounded by wooden scaffolding, which burst into flames like matches at the very first spark. The fire quickly spread to the beautiful wooden roof, covered with heavy lead sheets. The heat inside the cathedral became so intense that the stone columns began to crack with a thunderous roar. Tombs in the crypts burst open under the immense pressure, exposing ancient mummified bodies. The lead on the cathedral's roof began to melt rapidly from the hellish rising temperature. Thousands of liters of molten metal poured down the gutters onto the crowded streets. This glistening, poisonous river flowed down the stone steps, burning absolutely everything in its path. The silvery stream of death caught up with the fleeing people, burning their bodies down to the very white bones. The sound of sizzling human flesh mingled eerily with the clanging of cracking stone slabs on the pavement. You witnessed this horrifying spectacle from afar, feeling an incredible heat on your dirty cheeks. A leaden, scorching rain crashes down on the neighboring houses, setting them ablaze in a matter of seconds. The air quickly fills with the acrid smell of burning lead, which fatally poisons the lungs. Breathing becomes not only difficult, but critically dangerous due to the toxic, heavy fumes. Your head begins to spin violently from the catastrophic lack of clean oxygen in the atmosphere. Gunpowder stockpiles left in private homes. After the Civil War begin to explode en masse throughout the city. Each powerful explosion sends fountains of burning wood chips and stones flying into the air. Shrapnel from the burning debris flies in all directions, brutally maiming the unfortunate fugitives. These sudden blasts force people to fall to the ground, covering their heads with their hands in a panic. Shards of roof tiles whistle through the dry air like bullets on a real battlefield. You instinctively crouch to the ground, waiting for the next deafening and destructive roar. Hot ash falls from the sky so thickly that it feels as if a black snowstorm has begun in London. It settles in a thick, unpleasant layer on your shoulders, hair, and dirty, torn clothes. This strange snow burns your skin painfully and forces you to constantly brush it off. You blink frequently, trying to get rid of the tiny hot grains of sand that have gotten right under your eyelids. Tears stream uncontrollably down your face, leaving pale, wet trails on your soot-blackened skin. The fiery storm greedily devours oxygen, creating areas of low pressure in the narrow streets. Because of this, the doors of London's houses slam shut with such force that the sturdy wooden door frames are torn out. People find themselves locked inside their homes with not the slightest hope of any quick rescue. Their desperate pounding on the windows is drowned out by the general roar of the inexorably approaching London flames. You cover your ears with your hands so as not to hear the heart-wrenching death cries of your neighbours. The catastrophe is finally and irrevocably beyond any human control. Seventeenth century firefighting technology was utterly powerless against such a firestorm. City firefighters used so-called fire hoses, which resembled large copper enema devices. These primitive devices held only a few liters of water and required the coordinated efforts of 3 people. The stream from such a syringe barely reached the second-floor windows of a burning wooden building. The water simply evaporated in the scorching air, without even reaching the source of the raging inferno. The primary method of firefighting at the time remained passing leather buckets of water along a long human chain. People lined up from the river to the site of the fire, quickly passing the heavy buckets from hand to hand. However, amid the terrible crush and widespread panic, forming such a chain was physically impossible. Buckets were often spilled onto the feet of people running in fear, turning the ground into very slippery mud. The fire moved across the rooftops much faster than the volunteers could bring a new supply of water. The water wheels under the famous London Bridge, which pumped water into the city, burned down on the very first day. The lead pipes of the old water supply system melted in the streets, permanently cutting off access to life-giving water. Opening the wooden street hydrants became completely useless, as the pressure in the system had dropped entirely. Fire crews used huge iron hooks on long, heavy wooden poles. They hooked them onto thatched roofs and load-bearing wooden beams, desperately trying to bring the houses crashing to the ground. This arduous process required enormous physical effort from dozens of strong and resilient men. But the strong wind carried sparks so far that the fire simply leaped across the ruined, empty lots. The flames played a cruel game with the rescuers, always staying a few steps ahead of them. The mayor had refused for too long to grant permission for the urgent demolition of the expensive merchants' houses. He was terrified that the influential owners would force him to pay enormous compensation out of his own pocket. Bureaucracy and greed were killing the ancient city much faster than the out-of-control flames themselves. By the time King Charles II finally took personal command, it was already too late to change anything. Precious time had been lost forever, and half the capital had already turned into smouldering ruins. You see a group of soldiers trying to blow up a house with a barrel of black, smoky gunpowder. They hope to quickly create a wide wasteland that the fire physically cannot cross. The roar of the explosion deafens you, and a cloud of acrid brick dust flies into your face. Shards of glass clatter down onto the pavement, deeply cutting the faces of the curious onlookers standing nearby. But this radical measure does far more harm than good in the fight against the elements. The burning debris from the blown-up house simply sets the neighboring narrow streets ablaze with renewed destructive force. Rescuers look like true living dead due to extreme exhaustion and severe thermal burns. Their gaunt faces are black with soot, and their eyes roll wildly in their sockets from prolonged sleep deprivation. Many of them simply collapse right onto the pavement and instantly fall into a deep, death-like sleep. Their exhausted comrades have to drag the sleepers by their legs away from the encroaching heat of the flames. None of them believe anymore that this apocalypse can be stopped by mere human strength. Near the water itself, the crowd's density reaches a critical mass. People are crushing each other with terrifying force. Everyone wants to get as close as possible to the edge of the saving cold London River. A continuous, eerie roar of weeping, curses, and the screams of people crushed in the stampede fills the air. You feel that your ribs could easily snap at any moment under this monstrous pressure. The water glistens ahead, but the path to it is completely blocked by a wall of human bodies and wrecked carts. The sight of the Thames finally kills the last fragile hope you had for a quick rescue. The banks of the Thames present an utterly surreal and incredibly terrifying scene. The warehouses filled with oil and tar on the embankment are blazing so brightly that it's almost painful to look at the water. Huge burning barrels burst from the heat, and boiling oil flows in wide streams straight into the river. The water's surface is covered with a thick, poisonous film of burning grease and molten black tar. The Thames is literally burning before the eyes of the people, who are stunned and trapped in a deadly corner. Wooden boats and barges moored along the shore burst into flames one after another like dry kindling. Sailors, in a panic, hack at the mooring lines with axes, trying to steer the vessels into relatively safe waters. But burning debris falls onto the wooden decks, setting the sails and the thick, tarred ropes of the boats ablaze. The owners of the surviving boats begin to shamelessly demand exorbitant sums for a crossing to the other side. The price for the short trip increases 100-fold, turning salvation into an exclusive privilege for the wealthy. The poor, in utter desperation, throw themselves into the river, trying to swim across on their own. But the water right at the shore is literally boiling because of the hot vegetable oil flowing into it. People suffer horrific thermal burns simply by trying to cool their severely overheated bodies. They scream in hellish pain and quickly sink to the dark riverbed, tangled in their heavy, wet clothes. Swimming to safety proves an utterly impossible task for an emaciated Londoner. The bodies of the drowned drift slowly by, illuminated by the ominous orange glow of the burning city. London Bridge, the only pedestrian route to the South Bank, is also engulfed in merciless flames. The houses, densely built right on the bridge, burn like a bright torch, completely blocking the passage for the fugitives. People try to break through the wall of fire across the bridge, but many simply fall down into the churning water. Collapsing wooden structures break through the floors, forming huge, gaping, deadly holes. The path to the other side is completely and permanently cut off for tens of thousands of people trapped in the city. You stand in the dense crowd on the embankment, staring at the burning river with eyes red with despair. The heat behind you grows increasingly unbearable. The fire is rapidly and mercilessly catching up to the crowd of refugees. Sparks fall onto the hair of the women standing in front of you, and in a panic, they begin to beat their heads. The air is thick with the nauseating smell of burnt flesh, boiling tar, and rotten river sludge. You have no money left to pay the greedy boatman for a life-saving trip south. Suddenly, the crowd instinctively surges backward, away from the scorching and dangerous shoreline. A new, terrifying stampede begins. Now people are trying to flee back into the depths of the burning city. You are swept up in this maelstrom of human bodies, your weary legs torn from the slippery ground. The only chance of survival is to break through to the northern outskirts, where the open, safe fields begin. But to do that, you must once again pass through the labyrinth of burning, heavily smoke-filled narrow streets. It seems like pure suicide, but the trapped, panicking crowd has no other choice. You cover your face tightly with the wet sleeve of your shirt, trying to filter the thick, poisonous smoke in any way you can. Every new step is incredibly difficult. Your lungs feel like they're burning from the inside. All around, the walls of tall buildings are collapsing, burying the fugitives under tons of scorching bricks and grey ash. Finally, the air grows slightly cooler, and the smoke begins to gradually dissipate under the force of the wind. You run out onto the wide open meadows of Mirfield, on the northern, deserted outskirts of London. The ground beneath your feet gives way to soft grass, thickly covered with a layer of grey ash. You fall to your knees, gasping for fresh air that tastes as sweet as linden honey. Your heart pounds so hard in your chest that it feels ready to burst through your ribs, broken in the crush. You slowly turn your head back and look at the place that was your home just yesterday. A gigantic sea of fire blazes on the horizon, stretching for many kilometers wide. A massive column of smoke rises into the heavens, obscuring the stars and turning the night into a bloody day. Great London has been destroyed, burned to the ground along with all its great hopes and riches. You survived this terrible meat grinder, but your real trials are only just beginning on these cold ashes. Surviving the fire itself was only half the battle. Now you must survive in its aftermath. The Great Fire of London in 1666 raged continuously for 4 long days. It completely destroyed more than 13,000 homes, hundreds of churches, and key government buildings. About 100,000 people were left completely homeless on the eve of the approaching cold autumn. Refugee camps in the fields very quickly became breeding grounds for terrible diseases, starvation, and horrific crime. The surviving townspeople sincerely envied the dead, who no longer had to struggle for a stale piece of bread. Today we took a virtual walk through the burning streets of the capital, relying solely on our senses. We felt the heat on our backs, breathed in the acrid smoke, and clearly heard the cries of human despair. This tragedy perfectly illustrates just how fragile and defenseless human life was in the 17th century. Finding oneself there on that fateful night, an ordinary person's chances of survival were practically zero. History can be extremely cruel, and sometimes it is useful to feel its searing breath on one's own skin.